Hi, I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which brings you the big G for the gospel of Jesus Christ, and little g, all the good things that people do to put the gospel of life into action. Hey, gang, today we have like a dynamite guest because this guy, my buddy, Steve Brooder, is the CEO. You know what that means? The big chief at St. Matthew's House, which I'm going to say is the heart of Collier County and regions beyond. How's that? It's growing like crazy. And for full disclosure, I have served on the board of St. Matthew's House. Now, I've asked Steve to be here to explain to you what St. Matthew's House does. A lot of you just think, oh, it's a soup kitchen or it's just a homeless shelter. But it's much broader than that. It helps people who have addictions to drugs and alcohol. And furthermore, it works very closely with the people who are involved with mental health in our area. So next week, we're going to have the CEO of the David Lawrence Center, Scott Burgess, on to further expand on some of the work that has to be done and is being done. But more has to be, you like that, more has to be done regarding mental health. Because a lot of the clients that we have at St. Matthew's House, they come in with drug and alcohol problems, they are homeless, they have other issues that need psychological and psychiatric attention. So with nothing further to do, I want to introduce to you my buddy and the CEO of St. Matthew's House, Mr. Steve Brooder. Welcome, buddy.
Thank you, Father Michael. I'm happy to be with you.
I'm happy you're here.
Yeah.
Right? You see, he's like a buddy, so I'm going to be really nice to him. Okay, Steve, tell us about St. Matthew's House. See, the first thing that hit me, there was an article in the Naples Daily News a few weeks ago, and you talked about the feeding program. And a lot of people, they think about, oh, yeah, well, you know, they have a soup kitchen. But I think that you were mentioning about like 500,000 meals being served because, folks, you know, we've had tragedies. We have this COVID, and that messed everything up. And then we have, you know, there's this hurricane deal, and that messed everything up. But St. Matthew's House helps to put things back together again. So, Steve, tell us about the feeding ministry. What happens?
Well, and first of all, Father Michael, you said it exactly the way we hear it often. People think about one slice of our mission. Mm-hmm. They think about hunger, they think about homelessness, or they think about addiction, or thrift stores, but it is really a broad mission now, 35 years in existence. And when you mention hunger, we've had a soup kitchen for all those years, and we had a small pantry where we served about 300 or 400 families a month out of that pantry. It was primarily a walk-up pantry, and then COVID came in March of 2020. That number shot up to 4,000 families served in April of 2020, and it's climbed ever since. So now typically we serve about 20,000 families every month. The number is over 500,000 served since March of 2020. And I'm talking about groceries, enough groceries to get by for a family of 4 for several days. It's really become what we like to call a homeless prevention program. Because if we can help families with some groceries in this time of rising inflation, just record inflation, that may get them by. They may be able to devote their resources to their rent or gas in the car, medical bills, and not have to spend it on groceries, which are so expensive. So I think that's the reason the number has stayed up. There's a lot of food insecurity.
You know what amazed me, continually amazes me, is the number of senior citizens coming for, well, first of all, they're coming for food. I remember at Thanksgiving, a lot of senior citizens came, and I mean, folks, these are old people, I mean, older than me. I mean, so they're pretty old. And also homelessness. Senior citizens, they're living in their cars. Steve, tell us about why is this happening to seniors?
People that are living on fixed incomes or lower income families are especially impacted by inflation right now. So we do have a lot of seniors that just can't keep up with their expenses, their HOA, their condo fees, just the rent and utilities. So it's a disturbing trend that we have more seniors in our homeless shelter, now about 20% of the shelter population.
20% are seniors?
Yes, and these are folks that may not likely be able to find a job and get themselves back on their feet. So it's a tough problem. You mentioned the stories, and I had a couple that 90-some-year-old that came to one of our food distributions, a Holocaust survivor. That just wanted to make a Thanksgiving dinner for her friends, and she couldn't have done it without our direct assistance. Another woman, again in her 90s, was living in her car in a Walmart parking lot, and she had nowhere to go. So we helped her get assisted living facility in Cape Coral, but it's because the cost of living in Collier County and Naples has gotten so high, these seniors are being forced out of their homes.
You know, folks, sometimes we think, well, it's only young people, or but we used to use the term degenerates. I mean, that's unfortunately, but now we're talking about senior citizens, 90 years old, living in a car in the Walmart parking lot, 96-year-old lady coming to get food for a Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, we are in trouble. And so you can see how important St. Matthew's House is to our community. Could you talk a little bit about the shelter? We have a shelter for people that need to stay someplace.
We have the only 2 shelters in Collier County. They're for unsheltered or homeless people. A wait list that's just been exploding in the last year or so because of inflation, and Ian has displaced a lot of people, Hurricane Ian, from their homes. So we're working on getting additional beds in the Naples facility, which is called the Campbell Lodge. The county allowed us to increase the number of beds there, but that gets to 150. Father, we typically have 180 people on our wait list every day. So these are people seeking shelter that, for some reason, there's many reasons for homelessness. I like to say the number one reason is loneliness. And that can come from just separation from family. They've lost their family connections. It can come from a loss of job, medical bills, just the rising inflation that is putting a pressure on people. So there's a great number of people that need help to get some shelter and get back on their feet. Give them some time.
Okay, so somebody comes to the shelter and says, hey, look, I'm homeless, all right? And you say, well, we're kind of booked. What happens to them? How does it work?
We have to work on a wait list. We do take in folks on emergency status. So if someone is dropped off from the jail or is just in trouble, we take them in. We find a cot and we find a space for them. Again, I think about Christmas Day. I was at the shelter, and a father with 2 young boys showed up, no place to go, living in a car. He was seeking shelter. So we're able to accommodate people like that on a temporary basis, but we need more shelter for these folks that are just, for a lot of reasons, are out of luck and need a resource.
You know, folks, these last couple of weeks, it's been cold here in Naples. I mean, I thought it was like, back in Brooklyn or something like that. It was cold. And what do you guys do? Like, it's cold weather. There are people living out what we call the woods. They're just out there. And when it's cold, what do you guys do?
We open the shelters. It's a cold weather emergency anytime. And now in Florida, not in New York, no. When the temperature drops below 50 degrees is an emergency. So
believe me, I know, I was freezing.
We open the shelters, and again, we take people in on cots. We put them up in the open areas that we have in the shelters, give them a meal, give them a chance to stay warm and get refreshed. And unfortunately, they're back out on the streets if we don't have beds for them.
Most of the food is, I think all of it's donated, right? Okay, and how do you get the food? Where does it come from? And then how does it get distributed?
Yeah, we exist on so many levels. We operate on so many levels because of generous donors. So
you hear that? Generous donors. That's you. Okay.
The food that is donated comes from our food bank partners, from churches, from different agencies and organizations, and just individuals drop off food at the shelter and at our donation drop-off on Airport Road. So the shelter does exist primarily on those donated food items. Occasionally, we have to buy a protein, some meats or produce to supplement, but by and large, it's all donated food that we prepare. And you think about, there's a television show called Chopped. So our chef is like the show Chopped. Whatever we have is what he works with to create the meal. So
and let me tell you something, folks. I've eaten there numerous times. It's excellent. I mean, you couldn't get as good a meal, if you went to the finest restaurant in Naples. I'm telling you the truth. This guy knows what he's doing, and people like you, generous people, give food and give us money to buy the food. So keep up your good work. It might get you into heaven. Okay. Now, I can't guarantee it, but tell God I said so. Okay. Now, where do people go and get this food? They certainly can come to the shelter, but where else? You have distribution sites everywhere, don't you?
Right. Our monthly distributions, we have 13 different sites. They're mostly churches, but we do have a large distribution at Paradise Coast Sports Complex. That's worked out well for us. So it's a drive-up distribution. This is the model we went to after COVID, where people can line up, and this is all on our website. We mention the dates and the times in several areas in social media, and people can text to get the information. They can go to our website and find out how to text to find out when the next distribution is. So they drive up, they open their trunk or their back door, and we're giving them a pantry bag which has canned goods and dry goods in it. Then we usually supplement that with fresh produce or proteins or both. So they really, and water and juices and things like that. So they really get a good meal at these distributions to be able to get by.
See that, folks? This is fantastic. But that ain't the whole story of St. Matthew's House. The other part of it is maybe a lot of you are more familiar, perhaps some of you, with our drug and alcohol rehabilitation program called Justin's Place. And could you talk just a little bit about Justin's Place?
It started in 2010, and we saw people come into the shelter that were suffering from substance abuse, and they would come into the shelter. Of course, we do drug testing and breathalyzer testing. So they come in and they go out. They're back on the streets, back in their addiction. When we saw that, we realized that there's really a need for an addiction recovery program. So in 2010, we started the men's program, and then in 2013 started a women's program. So since that time, we've graduated over 750 men and women from a 12-month faith-based residential recovery program.
Literally, folks, literally, these people have had their lives reclaimed because drugs is so destructive of human beings and destructive to families. These people have gotten back on the right track. And it's through not just counseling, not just a good environment, but because the word of God is read to them, discussed among them, and practiced among them. So this is a real holistic program. And a lot of you send in donations for the Justin's Place program. I want to thank, the Holochek family. They've been great donors to St. Matthew's House to make sure that the program is run well and that we continue to serve the needs of those who are addicted, drugs and alcohol. And like the numbers of people dying from drugs these days, it's over 100,000. Steve, what's that number like? I mean, fentanyl, what's going on here?
The latest number is about 110,000 deaths a year. And you shared an article that I just read that talked about when you think about the Vietnam Memorial Wall, some 50,000 lives lost. And we're almost doubling that every year with lives lost due to drug overdose. Fentanyl is the killer. That's such a scourge right now on our society with it streaming across the southern border, really all borders, it finds a way to get in. When you look at the fentanyl that's come into this country, it could kill every man, woman, and child many times over. Thank goodness they apprehend a lot of these smugglers and can get the drugs, but a lot gets through. And now fentanyl is being laced into prescription drugs that look like prescription drugs. Marijuana is another area that we're seeing increasing overdose coming from fentanyl. People are smoking marijuana and it's in there.
and they're putting the fentanyl in the marijuana.
Yes.
Of course, for the most part, of course, folks, marijuana is it's harmless, and as a matter of fact, it's good for your health. Yeah, right. Who's kidding whom? They want to legalize marijuana and have these medical marijuana shops around here. Hey, folks, it's a lot of, I'm going to use a technical term now, baloney. Baloney. All right, now you got the technical term. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, this is tragic. 110,000 people on drugs. We worry about, the Chinese invading the US of A. Well, they're sending the fentanyl over through South America and Mexico. They killed off 110,000 people already. What more do we need? That's more than Vietnam. They're terrible.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
As you can imagine, producing this wonderful program, Action for Life, it costs a great deal of money. We're going to need your help. So if you would like to donate to keep this good news program on the air, please go to your computer, your cell phone, actionforlife.net. And now for our thought for the day. Prayer is extremely important. We're not fighting a battle just against earthly powers. We're fighting a battle against evil. Please take some time each day to pray and ask God for the strength that you need and that we need to keep up the battle for life. Hey gang, I know a lot of you sometimes can't watch all of our episodes of Action for Life. However, we have a solution for that. All you have to do is go to YouTube and search for Action for Life Florida. And you can catch up on all the shows, and guess what? Extra added bonus, you get to hear my weekly homily. So YouTube and you make a fine couple.
There's many other ways that drugs are just eroding our society and our culture. The whole idea of legalization and it's not that harmful is a disturbing trend. When we look at New York City, your stomping grounds, they have free clinics where people can go in and use drugs in those situations so they don't have to be on the streets. It falls under the term called harm reduction, which is really just enabling and encouraging people to continue to use drugs.
Yeah, euphemisms. These are called euphemisms. They think all these terms up, and then they make it sound like it's good, but it's no good. It's destructive to human beings, and yet we're supposed to buy this baloney. So you have any politicians that are telling you there's nothing wrong with marijuana, it's medical, it's good, you could have these pot shops all over town? Don't believe them. Quote, mwah. Okay. Now, so I want to go into something else now, which is very, very important. We talked about, we had people coming, originally for the soup kitchen. That's the old term, soup kitchen. Then we have a homeless shelter. And then we recognize, hey, there's addictions involved here. We have to do something about that too. But there's something else now that goes along with the addictions and the homelessness. And there's a mental health problem, all right? So again, we talked about the holistic approach of St. Matthew's House and the holistic approach that has to be made in our community to taking care of these people with these problems. Now, Steve, talk a little bit about what's going on with the mental health situation here in Collier County.
Sure. We go through an intake process when people enter our shelters or recovery programs. We go through a lot of questions, just a questionnaire, survey type of setting. About 60% of the people that come into our programs self-identify that they're diagnosed with mental illness. That's that's self-reported. So
how many don't report? I mean,
that's the problem.
Yeah.
And later on, when people that don't report that, we often see them later on in the program exhibiting or admitting to the diagnosis. So we've been fortunate that we're coordinating with a lot of different partners and agencies and clinicians to have some treatment in our facilities. We do counseling, we do different intervention to try to get to the root cause. You know, a lot of people may be diagnosed or think they're suffering from mental illness, but again, it's separation from family, it's loneliness, it's anxiety, depression, and then they self-medicate. So often people look at them and say, well, there's some mental illness there. We find that often with treatment and our case management that sometimes people aren't really suffering from mental illness. Those that are, we depend on our partners. David Lawrence Center is one of our main partners. It's the behavioral health center in Collier County. It's the only resource for folks that are uninsured that are either suffering from substance abuse and need a detox facility, or they have a mental health diagnosis and they need treatment. So we've collaborated with David Lawrence Center for years. They've been around 47 years. We've been here 35 years. So it's a great collaboration. There's a tremendous need out there. There's a lot of people that just aren't reached.
Yeah, you know, folks, as some of you know, I'm at the hospital quite often. And there used to be a mental health facility at Naples Community Hospital, but that closed down, all right? What happens then? Somebody's acting in a bad way. And sometimes the family reports them or brings them to the hospital. Sometimes they get what is called Baker acted. And that means, you know, somebody calls the police and say, hey, you know, this person is in bad way mentally. The police have to come. Sometimes they bring them over to David Lawrence, but David Lawrence says, hey, this is beyond our care at the moment. And they send them to the hospital. All right. It's like a revolving door. I mean, you see the sheriff's car pulling up, drop the person off. There's no way that the hospital can treat them overnight or 2 nights or for a stay, which they need. And the next thing you know, the sheriff's car is back and goes around again. Now, what happens to them? There's no place for them to go. And they end up back on the street. And so when people worry about, oh, you know, if we have a mental health facility, it'll make our neighborhood more dangerous. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, these are human beings. It's like any other sickness, mental illness, it's a sickness. Number two, what's the difference if they're in a building or they're wandering on the streets? I'd rather have them in a building being treated than wandering around the streets. Don't get me agitated. Steve, talk about this, okay? You see how aggravated I am.
Well, you're right, exactly where they go. If the sheriff's office picks somebody up, let's say on a street corner, they take them to the ER or David Lawrence Center. Now, if they go to the ER because NCH doesn't have a floor anymore for mental health, it may give them some medicine and they turn them back out, that revolving door that you mentioned. Or they drop them at St. Matthew's House. That's often the case. And if we find that there's clinical need, then we'll refer them to David Lawrence Center. One of the problems is that you described, Maureen, they may get some medication and then they're turned back out because there's no facility to keep them at and help them sustain or get stabilized. So they get back out on the streets, they don't take their medication, and then we go right back into the same cycle. It's a real problem. Our jails are filled, our ER is filled, David Lawrence and St. Matthew's House are filled up with people that are suffering from mental illness that need help.
A lot of people, folks, that are in jail, they're there because they're mentally ill. It just goes around. It's a vicious cycle that this is. And, you know, to think that a community like Naples, with the affluence that we have, and the professional people that we have, and we don't have a facility here. You know, I'm not going to use a crude expression, but this just doesn't fly. It just doesn't fly. Okay, now, Steve, what are we going to do about it?
Well, one of the initiatives that it's good timing because you mentioned Scott Burgess is going to be with you. Coming up on February 14th, there's a Brooder County Commissioners.
And Father O's going to be there. Father O's going to be there. Commissioners, pay attention. Father O's going to be there.
It's a very important meeting. This facility that David Lawrence has proposed on 5 acres that they would be gifting to the county is an expanded facility for treating the people with mental illness, with beds and different facilities. It was all decided back in 2018 and again in 2021, and more recently the Planning Commission voted to reject the location next to David Lawrence Center. And what does that do? Well, that puts the whole process back in play. Now we go back and look at other locations which aren't suitable. So we're really hoping that the Brooder County Commissioners follow votes that they had already made unanimously to approve the location next to David Lawrence. That's where they've been. There's a continuity of care between the facilities that would be a good thing. The alternative that has been brought up for a location for this additional facility to treat the mentally ill in our community is next to the jail.
But that doesn't fly.
That's a bad practice. In fact, the State Department that helps fund David Lawrence has said it's really negative to have a facility like that for mental illness attached to or next to a jail.
Right.
So that's a bad solution. We're really hoping that because the taxpayers voted to fund this facility, the construction of the facility, Board of County Commissioners has previously voted, and neighborhood information meetings have been held. So we hope that it's a go.
Folks, what more do you need? We just can't keep pushing this off down the road. You start all over again. This could take years and years and years. This is a moral issue, and we must do something about it. So speak up, call your commissioners and tell them that Father O and Steve want that facility built. Gabish, that's Italian, gabish. Steve's for action, I'm for action, and I hope you are too. We would like to thank our generous sponsors for their wonderful support. Thanks for watching. Please join us next time for Action for Life. I'm for action, and I hope you are too. I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which talks about the gospel of Jesus Christ, the big G, and the little g, all the good things that people are doing to put the gospel of life into action. So please join us for the next episode of Action for Life.